And joining us now here in studio, Mike Nagy, Sustainable Food Systems Consultant and Chair of the Wellington Water Watchers. And as I welcome you here, why don't we start by you just telling us who they are?
Wellington Water Watchers, Source Protection Volunteer Committee based out of Guelph, Wellington County, just looking at source protection issues for water in Ontario.
Gotcha. Okay, first question. Ontario has a fish industry?
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people don't know that.
It actually, when you think of the historical aspect of what we used to have here, it was quite stunning through the Great Lakes. You know, as people know, the Great Lakes is a massive body of fresh water. But now we have an industry that still supports $20 to $40 million worth of landed sales and employs up to over 1,500 people on boats and processing.
But I'm also told we only have 2.2% of Canada's fish supply, so
very
we're
small.
not a huge player.
No, and that's part of the topic here is why, you know, we should be and we could be. And when you look at the legacy of what we've lost, it's kind of sad. But there's also still a lot of people very dependent. It's up to $200 to $400 million worth of the economy when you do the spin-offs with trucking and repairs and all the other things. So it's still a significant aspect of local economies. But when you ask someone and say in Ontario, describe a rural community to me, they usually don't describe a fishing village.
No. Well, how well are we managing our fish stocks right now?
Well, in certain areas, not very, or most areas not very well, I would say, and around the world in a terrible manner. I'd say Great Lakes fisheries, what we have left, managed fairly well. Lake Erie perch and pickerel and Georgian Bay whitefish, you know, could be always better, but they are thriving industries that seem to be holding their own.
Do family fishing farms still exist?
Farms? Well, family fishing enterprises still exist.
You don't call them fishing farms? What do you call them?
They would be called independent wild catchers, so
okay.
Harvesters of wild fish. And certainly, I mean, if you go down to Port Dover, which is an old family spot for anyone, especially grew up in the Hamilton area, that's an old family spot of ours. It's a thriving fishing village. Certainly not what it was like in the 50s when there was up to like 3,200 people plying the waters in Lake Erie. But there's still a lot of boats down there.
I go there once a year,
yeah.
And the perch is fantastic.
Yeah.
Or in Manitoulin Island, the whitefish up there is still fantastic.
It is.
But we haven't got enough of this? Is that what your point is?
It's partly that it's the abundance is one issue, but it's how we've centralized our food system plays a vital role in why Ontarians can't get that fish. You know, on average, a Canadian has 7 people, 7 channels touching the fish before it gets to their plate. There's a lot of middlemen middle people making money off of fish or distributing that fish. But there's so many imports displacing Ontario fish, it's tremendous, including our labeling system.
When we say fish in Canada, Michael, let's bring that pie chart if we can, because we're really talking almost exclusively about one thing.
Yes.
So, I mean, we see on the pie chart here, 70% of what we do in this country is basically salmon. And then if you go around, mussels 15%, and everything else, trout, other finfish, clams, oysters, other shellfish, very small numbers. So that just lays out what we're talking about here. And let me follow up by going straight to a quote. This is from Patrick Moore, who is a former co-founder of Greenpeace, the environmental movement. And he says we should boycott farmed salmon and eat only wild salmon. Whoever thought up this lunatic idea, he says, should get the Nobel Prize for anti-logic. How can you save wild salmon by eating more of them? Yet a whole gaggle of goofy groups has succeeded in convincing chefs, restaurant owners, and consumers that a boycott of farm salmon will somehow be good for wild salmon. Activists are blackmailing chefs and restaurateurs by threatening to picket and harass them if they don't take farm salmon off their menus. But the truth is, every time you eat a farm salmon, you are saving a wild salmon. It's clear to me, he says, that aquaculture, including salmon aquaculture, constitutes the future of healthy protein and oil, nutrients that we need to feed a growing population. It is also the only feasible way to increase seafood production, while at the same time managing the wild fisheries on a sustainable basis. What do you think of his argument?
Well, there's pretty well everything he states there I oppose totally.
So you're one of the goofy groups?
Yeah, if he wants to call me that. Some could say he's the goofy group for being on the nuclear side and a whole bunch of other areas, and seems to be, you know, caving into the high-paid lobbies. This is a lot of salmon farms are tied to very big business.
What don't you like about what he said here?
Well, there's many things. First of all, it's a feed to food ratio. First of all, so you're using 3 to 4 units to create 1 unit of farm salmon. That's the first thing. So it's a net sea loss. It's a net calorie loss. That food has to come from somewhere. Generally, we're clear-cutting our oceans, if I could use that comparison, by massive trawling and drift netting to get these species to make into food pellets, which is highly inefficient in the first place, grinding them down and then feeding them to salmon. Salmon are carnivores. They cannot eat vegetarian, they're not vegetarians like tilapia, for example. So they use vast amounts of resources. Second of all, infectious salmon anemia and other diseases that come from salmon pens, which sea lice are naturally occurring, but sea pens are big incubators and hold those diseases throughout the entire year because they're not fallowed through the season. So when the babies or the fries go by them when they leave the rivers, the wild salmon, they get infected by the salmon lice. So then they're actually killing off the wild salmon at tremendous rates. This is what these are the links that are trying to be proven. Also, the waste. The ocean has become a free dumping ground for waste. For example, a factory farm that we would have for a bunch of hogs in it, at least that factory farm has to deal with its waste and pay for it. The sea is a free dumping ground of that waste, and it's causing huge environmental issues.
So are these part of the reasons why, well, mind you, okay, environmentalists, it seems in general, oppose farm fishing. For these reasons or other reasons?
It's mostly from waste, the ones that I just stated. There are very sustainable fish farms. There's sustainable tank trout and pond farms. And you have no
objection with them?
There's always issues that you can have if you're not dealing with the waste or the pathogens properly that come out of those farms. So closed tank, which of course the large aquaculture industries don't want, they don't want closed containment systems because they'll have to pay for the disposal of the waste, which they get free now. And that's why they're resistant. And if you look at where salmon farms, which is a Norwegian technology sponsored by big oil and big Norwegian money, that's gone through the entire world, you'll see the disappearance of wild stocks.
I mean, there are a finite number of things in this world we can care about. And the reality is, God put Ontario in the middle of the country, not on a sea. So make the argument why you think people in Ontario ought to care more about this issue.
I'm glad you brought that up. Ontario could, first of all, let's look at energy really quickly. Canada's probably one country that could be energy self-sufficient when it comes to oil. But under the NAFTA agreement, we're exporting so much oil to the United States, we have to bring in oil through the back door. Food is fairly similar in a lot of ways. For example, wild fish can play a massive role in our food security for this nation. When you look at that, we used to have 140,000 tons of fish harvested in the Great Lakes in the 1899, and 140,000 pounds, I should say. That's a lot of fish. And we've declined and declined and declined. We've basically destroyed that wild food species.
Where do you think we are right now? If we were 140,000 pounds then?
I should just check. 147 million pounds, I should say, is what we used to have in 1899.
147 million pounds.
67,000 tons of fish was the peak of Ontario fisheries in the Great Lakes.
And today?
And today, no one really knows in the pound so much. It's $20 to $40 million. So you could just divide that by the price, which is maybe $2.50 a pound. You get a number. It's low.
We're well low.
It's off the scale low. For example, Atlantic salmon that used to spawn through Lake Ontario, which is just coming back now. There's an old saying, people bought and sold houses and industry based on wild salmon catches in the old days. That's how abundant. But they basically went extinct or commercially extinct in 1860.
Do you think it's important for us to know where our seafood is coming from?
Absolutely. This is a huge issue. And part of the thesis that I did is 1 in 4, even Health Canada admits, 1 in 4 fish are substituted illegally or unintentionally. So when you're in a supermarket and it says salmon, first of all, our labeling doesn't require an exact species name. First of all, it doesn't have to tell you exactly where it was caught, if it was caught in Canada. And then there's all the confusion of where it was processed and where it was caught, et cetera, imported. It doesn't have to say whether it's farmed or wild. But
why do we need to know that?
We need to know these things for many reasons, for health and allergen, and because if we were to substitute lamb for beef, and just say, here, Steve, here's a package of beef, but there's lamb in there.
But we'd know that, wouldn't we? We could taste the difference.
We could taste well, you can actually taste the difference in fish as well. But we would just not tolerate having land-based terrestrial food substituted and called something else. Yet in the seafood industry, it's accepted practice.
Why?
Because we just haven't invested the time, because it is off our radar. Because back to central Canada and Ontario, it is part of our food security. And when we're bringing in massive amounts of fish from around the world that we don't know how it's grown, we don't know how it's really caught under very unsustainable conditions, when we have sustainable fish right in our backyard, it is part of our food security.
Sobeys, I think, introduced some kind of seafood tracing system or tracking system last month. You know about this?
Yes, everyone is experimenting with the traceability thing. See, in the University of Guelph has the Barcode of Life project, which is actually quite a unique technology right here, which is a DNA barcoding of fish. And they've actually been contracted by the FDA to find out what is the fish that was in this package. And that could be easily incorporated into a label so that when you go into a supermarket, you could literally scan, and there's countries doing that with your iPhone. You can scan and see the picture of the fisherman that actually caught your fish. In Canada, we're so far behind on labeling standards for fish, it's actually almost laughable.
Because what, lack of political will or interest, or?
I would say zero political will. Health Canada and Canadian Food Inspections Agency seem to have this gray area. They seem to switch responsibility, saying it's their responsibility. CFA says it's Health Canada's responsibility, and there isn't any progress. And again, we would not tolerate this in other parts of our food system.
You know what they say, though, and again, they do say this about other parts, whoever the they is. They say this about other parts of our food system, which is we got to be careful how many questions we ask here, because if you ask too many questions and you raise too many red flags in the population, they'll stop eating fish altogether. And you know, I know you're trying to get some good things done here, but they'll say you risk the existing industry by probing around and picking around too much. What do you think of that argument?
Well, what I think is actually simple, accurate, clear labeling can solve that problem. Let Canadians choose for themselves, Ontarians choose for themselves. If they see that this is wild-caught Port Dover, for example, Lake Erie perch, and they can actually maybe even see a picture of the fisherman, I think they're going to probably choose that over some mystery fish that's mislabeled in a product. And I think that can go a long way without even having to put any fear factor based into the food itself.
Gotcha. Mike, thanks so much for coming in tonight and helping us with this.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Mike Nagy, currently writing a book on local independent fisheries, and we look forward to seeing that at some point when that's done.
Thank you.